Well, New Labour is, if nothing else, very disciplined. So, of course, I will stick to the subject that you have given me. And it's a great honour, of course, to follow Martin Schulz, the President of the European Parliament, for now. Who knows where he may be by the middle of the year. And it's a great pleasure, I must say, to be speaking in Malta, which is an oasis of calm, stability and economic strength in our rather challenged union. For the years I served in the European Commission, had as one of my closest colleagues Joe Borg. Joe, as the Fisheries Commissioner, did an extremely good job at protecting fish. I, as a Trade Commissioner, did a rather diligent job in opening markets. And so you can see there was occasionally a slight tension entering into the relationship between the Fisheries Commissioner and the Trade Commissioner. But I can assure you, we never fell out. Now, I've been billed, as John has said, to speak about Europe in 2020 and beyond. We certainly face, in my view, very profound political and economic challenges in Europe. But if we want a good, durable future beyond 2020, we have got to start making a darn sight more and greater progress in addressing those challenges in 2014. We can't afford to hang around. The political choices relating still to the Eurozone are, in my opinion, immense, and the economic choices relating to Europe's future competitiveness are great. And what we need to do to ensure that the rest of the world, the fast-growing economies of China, of India, of Brazil and others, along with the United States, do not succeed in eating our collective lunch in Europe. That's a huge challenge. And I want to argue this evening that you can't actually understand the policy choices that Europe has to make without understanding the political mood in Europe, which I think has become much more volatile and a much greater influencing factor than we have known in the past, and how the crisis itself has reshaped and polarized a lot of European politics. Europe is certainly recovering from its crisis, but that recovery is a rather fragile and joyless recovery, and understanding the political consequences of that, in my view, is very important. And second, what matters in 2014 and in coming years is how Europe transitions from crisis management to long-term structural reform, and where it finds the political, the policy energy in order to do this successfully. And of course, again, the political mood is very relevant here. The question is whether Europe's leaders just get how great are the political difficulties and the economic challenges facing us in Europe. Do they understand both the public's demand for change, but also the public's hesitation in embracing the changes that we need? Do our leaders have a plan? Are they capable of following it and demonstrating this clearly to the European public? Well, I would say that I was, of course, hopeful. I mean, I am a former politician, so I am by definition optimistic. But I have to say to you too, I am not sanguine about the strength and grasp of European political leaders in the challenges that we face. Now, certainly this year feels like a very, very important year for Europe, that we have genuinely reached a turning point in the European crisis and in the European political cycle. I think there is a strong perception that the European economy has begun to sort of turn the corner, not, as we know, stellar growth, but at least a degree of confidence that there will be enough growth to make fiscal stabilisation and repair more attainable, and to put behind us the unsustainable debt dynamics that have hung over the Eurozone over these past 4 years. Now, my instinctive feeling is that this economic mood is probably slightly more confident than is justified, given the potential risks that we face, and we are already experiencing the unexpected in Ukraine. We have, of course, the huge comfort blanket of the ECB that has calmed market nerves to the point where creditors are behaving, rightly or wrongly, as if the existential crisis of the Eurozone is behind us. Certainly, the cost of borrowing by Dublin has fallen dramatically. Portugal managed to roll over several billion in debt at the end of the year. Spain and, of course, Italy are both funding themselves from markets at tolerable rates. And my God, in the case of Italy, what a debt of gratitude we owe to two people who are in this room, Mario Monti and Enrico Letta, who is over there. Thank God for you two and what you did in Italy and therefore did for the rest of Europe. Now, all this is evidence that we are through the worst. But away from the markets, I want you to focus on what's happening on the European street, by which I mean politically. I think that electorates have been exhausted by 5 years of austerity and the biggest retrenchment in public spending in Europe's post-war history, at the cost, it has to be said, of the public's faith in national and European political institutions. Policymakers are also pretty washed out after the heaviest burst of regulatory and institutional redesign in the European Union for a generation. Perhaps extensive repair is a slightly better way to put it than full redesign, or perhaps not yet even extensive repair. More has to come. But for me, the key point about the Eurozone as a whole is that it has the fiscal resources to manage its problems, but it doesn't yet have the politically acceptable means to redistribute money between countries in place to do so based on important principles of mutuality and solidarity. That political system was not put in place, was not created when the euro was launched. And this is what continues to make, in my view, the Eurozone vulnerable. And because this deep institutional shortcoming and the need for deeper integration, let's face it, has been exposed at a time, precisely the time, when the public in Europe is facing a condition of deep integration fatigue. So banking union, yes, that is certainly a priority and must sooner rather than later lead to the pooling of liability for the European banks at the European level so as to break that dangerous link between sovereigns and financial institutions. The ECB will take over supervision of the Eurozone's largest banks at the end of this year, and this needs to mark a turning point in the health of Europe's banking sector. A new centralised system for resolving Eurozone banks, and a robust ECB imposing a common template for assessing the health of bank balance sheets for the first time. These are important steps in breaking that destabilising link between weak banks and weaker EU states. The EU is also creating a system of economic and fiscal coordination so that states cannot become irresponsibly indebted in a way that threatens the credibility of the Eurozone as a whole. This is a necessary quid pro quo. But both of these solutions, both of them, and the rest of the redesign of the Eurozone that we're contemplating and to an extent is underway, have come up against the reluctance to unify the European Union politically, to make, in other words, German taxpayers and Greek ones genuinely part of the same political and fiscal community on the American model. So why the reluctance? Because for all the massive advances that Europe has taken in integrating its political economy over the last 6 years, the last 6 decades, European national identities and national allegiances remain strong within the EU. And I don't regret that, I don't condemn it or criticise it. It's a fact, and indeed, why shouldn't we have national identities continuing in the European Union? But the fact is, too, that the stronger European states, like Germany, still have profound doubts about taking on fiscal responsibility for some of their weaker European peers. Now, I cannot predict where European identity and solidarity will go, although I somehow doubt that the composition of the next European Parliament will help a great deal when it comes to European solidarity. And I'm sure, too, that the issues of mutuality in the operation of the Eurozone will only progress by incremental steps, but advance they must if the present crisis that we're going through is not to be wasted. But let's be under no illusion. The technocratic pressure for deeper integration confronts Europeans with a fundamental question of how European they are and what further adjustments in national identity and sovereignty they're prepared to make, and how far they want the Eurozone to evolve into a tighter political community. Of course, by the way, I couldn't help but mention in passing that, of course, Britain will have the greatest problem in coming to terms with this, as we have the weakest European identity of any EU state. Fortunately, the European Union has been loose enough for the last 30 years never really to test that sort of identity of Britain's in Europe. But that, of course, may not last. And there are many in the UK now who want to force the issue and force Britain to choose between national identity and continuing as a member of the European Union. And that's the debate that we're having in Britain at the moment, which, if some people in our Conservative Party have their way, will lead to a referendum in 2017, coincidentally coming with the presidency of Malta of the European Union. So good luck, Malta, in coming to terms with that. But the point I want to make is this, and it's a serious one. Euroscepticism in Europe is now not solely a British issue. If populist, anti-establishment, Eurosceptic parties of both the left and the right do well in the European Parliament elections, and I suspect they will, this will send a very powerful signal of discontent with the direction the EU is taking, and political elites will inevitably be unsure how to react to it. I think the most likely political response will be a weakening of nerve and to soft pedal integration, with implications for the desired banking and fiscal architecture that we've finally got to put in place to make the Eurozone durable. Assuming, of course, that the fading of the crisis permits this soft pedalling. It may not. If the crisis comes back, then these issues will head straight up to the top of Europe's agenda, and we will have no alternative but to take on and deal once and for all with the architectural design flaws of the European Union. But these are not the only choices Europe is facing. A large part of the problem lies in Europe's structural competitiveness and the need for supply-side reform, and to focus better on exploiting Europe's comparative advantages. We all know that Europe is now in a global competition to attract capital and to foster world-leading businesses, with the emerging world playing that important role in that competition. That is the crucial comparator. Europe is not competing with itself, and that's why we have to pull up our socks and transform our economic performance. In decades to come, 90% of global demand growth will be generated outside Europe. And if we want to benefit from this demand growth, then we have to be competitive in those fast-growing economies in the rest of the world. And I have to say and underline, we have to use our united European muscle in order to get access to those fast-growing economies of the world. And of course, alongside issues of economic competitiveness, there are huge other pressures facing us: demography and life expectancy, rising healthcare costs, the impact of migration and its impact on welfare systems. We all know and love our social model in Europe, and I count myself amongst those who are committed to it. But this model, we know, was designed when demographics were favourable and when economic growth was self-evident. Times are different now, and we need to adapt our social model to new demographics and to new economic realities. And this, I suspect, will be one of the very toughest debates we have in Europe between now and 2020. Now, I believe, as the Deputy Prime Minister has said, that there are other major challenges for us. Creating a unified digital economy in Europe, liberating services in a single market in Europe so that they provide the next growth spurt in Europe's economic future. We have a huge energy challenge on our hands, brought home not least by what's happened in Ukraine. Again, we've got to bring our costs down, and we have to make the best and most efficient use of our energy mix if we are going to be competitive globally in the years and decades to come. That too requires major jumps forward in creating a single market in energy, which we find a huge struggle, because whatever the preferences of Brussels in creating that unification, we have national preferences, as we know, that try to keep energy regulation national. So let me, in conclusion, sum up how I see Europe's prospects. The overall picture is better, but the trajectory of recovery, I would suggest to you, is still uncertain. Costs of the downturn for ordinary people have been too high and are still being paid in high unemployment, especially amongst young people, and stagnant real wages, which has a huge impact on the politics of Europe. People blame Europe and its elite for this, and you can hardly blame them for doing so. We are emerging, though, from the acute crisis, as I've said, of the financial system, with that legacy of sovereign debt, to the chronic problem of renewing Europe's industrial competitiveness. And it is that we have got to focus laser-like to secure our future. If that sounds very negative, I don't mean it to be. I would stress that I'm still very much long on Europe as an asset class. But you wanted to hear what I think are the challenges that define Europe's next 4, 5 years and decades to come. This is the year of new leaders in Europe. We are seeing the changing of the guard in Europe. We can only hope that our new leaders have the agenda, the determination and the political skills that they need in order to help deliver the change that the rest of Europe so badly demands. Thank you very much.